what does this all mean? The first question is, we all heard about Silicon Valley went down. Then we heard Credit Suisse went down. Those are big banks. But there was also the crash of the crypto with Sam Bankman-Fried. And I'm old enough to remember the savings and loan crash. There's no savings and loan today. They're gone. And people just sort of, once the panic's over, they forget about it. And the question is, where is your money? How safe is it? And what should you be doing? You have these big national banks. Everybody hears about the mega banks. There's a few of them. And then what happens is now the regional banks are starting to go. So Andy, would you give the distinction between a national bank like Wells Fargo, I think Bank of America, and my neighborhood bank? So what's the difference in the size of the banks?
Easiest way to say it is that they're just too big to fail, according to the Fed or to the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. These large commercial banks, their balance sheets are just as corrosive and filled with toxic assets as the smaller banks. But because they are so systemically tied to one another, as the Treasury Secretary calls them, systemically too big to fail, like Credit Suisse was, they will be bailed out.
It's about how the central banks of the world, besides they're not really banks, they're really Marxist, they're central, but they're not really banks, how they collude. And they collude with big companies like BlackRock. Deception, betrayal, collusion. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, this is collusion. She was also head of the Fed, and now she's head of the Treasury. Any collusion there? And so our economy is crashing at high speed.
So they're just these behemoth banks that have created balance sheets that are so intertwined with one another systemically that if they fail, it would have ramifications for the entire global financial system. These large, too big to fail commercial banks are more or less being backstopped and guaranteed by the Federal Reserve. Well, the rest of the banks, as we were told by Janet Yellen, if they're not too systemically large, as the majority of them are not, they won't be bailed out. They'll be bailed in, where the depositors are general creditors of the bank, and the money that you deposit really belongs to the bank and not to you. You are a creditor of the bank. And if they go on, instead of being bailed out the way that Silicon Valley Bank was, because many politicians had their money there and the big startup money for Silicon Valley, whatever the reason they bailed it out, it shouldn't have been bailed out according to the new laws. But these other banks, if they go under, you will be bailed in.
Be careful for those who are not paying attention. In other words, we're about to go into what's called the Wile E. Coyote moment. Everybody's running along and says, oh, don't worry, the Fed's got my back, the economy's fine. I love this guy Biden, and America's the greatest, the economy's safe. All of a sudden, when this thing crashes, and it's coming soon, it's the people that are not prepared. The people who are not watching this are the ones you're going to have to be afraid of. Be very, very afraid of those who are sound asleep at this moment, because when they wake up, they're going to wonder what happened. Number one was Janet Yellen, Secretary of Treasury, also Fed chairman at one time, saying that she, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Federal Reserve Bank will determine which banks live or die. Why did that terrify you? That's number one.
First of all, there's roughly 5,000 of these regional banks, and these banks, Robert, are responsible for roughly 70% of all the small business loans in the United States. And the small businesses have traditionally represented anywhere near 40% of GDP in this country. They are the backbone. These are the banks where you walk in and they say, hi, Robert, how's family? How's dad? How's mom? How are your kids? They make loans based upon relationships, not upon balance sheets and business plans. They are more of a piece of the community for all of middle America. And the majority of all the small businesses in this country have relied upon these banks because of a relationship. And where a business plan and a balance sheet may not stack up so well with one of the big 5 or 6 commercial banks, it works with the small regional banks, which means all of the depositors' money goes into the kitty to bail in the poor decisions and investments of those banks, and anything left over then gets given back out in a pro rata fashion, along with shares of what is a defunct bank. Which banks are too big to fail? Which banks are systemic? And when you have a small business or your life savings in a place where you thought it was safe and you never speculated to begin with, what's going to happen? Are you going to risk that to chance? And so she's lit a fuse under literally 5,000 banks in this country that have been the cornerstone of the small businesses and of middle America, forcing everyone into a handful of very large commercial banks. And it's a very, very frightening situation for most of these people to have to come to grips with either staying with the relationships they have and hoping for the best, while not really preparing for the worst, or yanking their money out and moving it to one of the large commercial banks, which she's telling us will not fail. We will backstop the too big to fail banks. And in essence, she's creating socialized banking, putting everyone into just a handful of very, very large banks.
That's this book here, the Communist Manifesto. It's centralized banking, that they control the whole economy. It's run by the academic elite, and you and I are screwed. So that's number one. The question is your money safe in a bank?
The regional banks represent 70% of all the small business loans in the United States. And for years, forever, small businesses in this country represented over 40% of the GDP in the United States. So we're realizing that these banks, in their hands, hold the majority of all the small businesses in this country. It's a very frightening thing if you own a small business and have your money in what amounts to any bank other than a commercial bank. And really a lot of people do, because these are the banks, and we've talked about this before. You talk about the small banks that are in your neighborhood, real close to the places you frequent. Well, the places you frequent, they go in and they have relationships with these small banks. These small banks make loans to small businessmen and women based less upon balance sheet and business plan and more upon relationships. And that's what these small banks really are all about, relationships, and how that has helped foster the small businesses in this country.
Small ebook, big impact, The Wealth Tree. The only 4 ways that will make you financially free forever. Download it here for free.